All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this form building webinar. My name is Nick, and today we'll be talking about formatting forms and the tools that you'll have available in terms of doing that. We'll go ahead and start out on our My Forms page today, and we'll be working off of our FormDr training packet. And just as a reminder, if you do have any questions as we go along, I will be opening up that chat toward the end of the webinar, and I'll be happy to go back over any information or answer any questions that you may have. But let's go ahead and get started in the meantime. To edit our form, we're just going to go ahead and click those three dots on the right side of the packet we want to update and edit forms. That's going to take us into step one, which is the Add Forms page. I've already added a couple of tabs for us here. All I've done is added two scratch tabs, one that we'll be using to demonstrate the formatting tools, and then the second one, which we'll be using a little bit later towards the end of the webinar. But just to add a scratch tab, all I've done is select the scratch button, title it accordingly, and then we are good to go. A scratch tab is only going to come with a patient name widget by default, which we can go into the builder to see. Both of these are just scratch tabs, and they'll just come with that patient name widget. That's simply because that patient name widget will be needed at least once in each packet, because the name filled out in the first and last name fields of this widget is going to be what that submission is logged under on the send and receive page as the person who filled out the form. But okay, let's go ahead and talk about the general formatting and just how the elements will be displayed in general. And so we can see here, whenever we want to add a new tab or a new element to our form, we can either do that. We could do that with one of two ways. We can either click it, which will add it to the bottom of the tab, or you can click and drag it if you would like that to go to a specific location and then just drop it right in there. You will notice that as I'm adding these in, they are just stacking on top of one another and taking up the entire answer area. Just a side note, if you do want a live preview of your form, you can always click on the style page, and this will be how the form will be displayed for the patient. This will always be how it's going to look on that live version. So you can always come to this page to see how that's going to look for you. And so you can notice that each text field is taking up 100% of that answer area. And then same with the drop down and single select options, although they won't look that way necessarily because they don't have the open text area. Now, this may not be a problem for you if you want to give your patient a good bit of space to fill that information out. However, if you are running out of space, or if you want your forms to print on less pages, you may need to work on formatting this information. So let's go ahead and go back into the builder and just talk about the tools you'll have available in terms of making that information display differently. And so your bread and butter is going to be down here in the formatting section, the column tool, the column widget. We can go ahead and place one here. We'll do it right underneath that patient name. And we'll go ahead and also add a date just to simulate our form here, make it look a little bit nicer. But we can go ahead and drag our patient name into that column. Then we're also going to add that date into that column as well. Now, both of these elements will be displayed on that same row. Again, we can go to that style page and see how that's going to look. So now each one will be taking up 50% of that area, and everything else that's not in the column will still be given that full space. So from here, what I like to do is kind of just separate out the sections, if you will, of information with different column widgets. You don't need to put everything into one column. I find it's a little bit easier, and you'll have to put everything in separate columns, and you'll also have a little bit more control on how that information will be displayed. So we'll go ahead and place another column just below the first, and we'll put the rest of our widgets in here. So we'll put both of our text fields, our drop down, and our single select option. Now you will notice that the column will default always to 3 elements per row. You can update this if you like, just by clicking that orange pencil icon when you hover over the column widget, and then updating the number of fields allowed per row. So we could change this down to 2 if we wanted to give them a little bit more space and to keep consistent with the section above, or we could go 4 wide if we wanted all of that information to be displayed on the same row. And again, we can go to the style page and we can see that that information now is taking up a lot less area in terms of page space because they are formatted to be on that same row. Now, if you are doing sections with multiple types or multiple entries of the same information, so if you're going to have multiple of the same section, and maybe this is siblings or something, and you're going to be asking for a name, you'll be asking for a relationship, and then we can do drop down, whatever the case may be. We'll just do marital status. And then sex. All right. Just to simulate our section here. Now, if you are going to be asking for multiple entries of this information, so maybe this is just the first one, and then you want to leave some room for additional siblings or whatever the case may be as well. There's a couple of different ways of doing this, and it's just going to be kind of personal preference in how you want that information to be displayed and how many options you want to give the patient to be able to fill out. So the first way would just be to duplicate this section. And now we won't have to rebuild all of this information. All we'll need to do is just open up that column widget again, except this time we're going to go ahead and click that duplicate button. That's just going to duplicate the column and everything within it. So it will duplicate each one of these elements as well. And so we could just duplicate that a few times to get as many as we want. Now, sometimes it's hard. Maybe you're asking for current medications or previous surgeries or siblings, whatever that case may be. And sometimes some people have very little, if any, and then other people have very many. So it can be hard sometimes to determine how many of these to do by default, just because you definitely want to give the patient the opportunity to fill out all of the information necessary. So the second way of doing this, and I find just to be a little bit easier, is to just build this column one time, and then we can place it into a repeating section widget that can also be found in that formatting section. Now, the repeating section widget will not format anything on its own. So if we were to put some text fields in here, they would stack just like they would if we put them out in that open space. But you can format within a repeating section widget. And so we could just click in this little blank area in between the arrow and the corner, and then we can drag that entire widget or entire column widget with all of its information included into that repeating section widget. And then from here, we can open up the repeating section, and maybe this is, siblings. We can also update that item label to be sibling, and then it will list them out as they add them. Again, we'll go to that style page for that live preview, and we can see how this is going to work in action. So instead of setting a predetermined amount of options for them to fill out, now the patient can fill out as many as necessary, up to as many as they need. They can add an infinite amount of these if they have that many, but this will give the patient a little more flexibility and also will save you a little bit of time in terms of creating this form or this section. All right. That is the repeating section widget, which can be found toward the bottom of that formatting section. All right, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the group tool. And now the group tool is primarily going to be used for you on the builder side, on the admin side, just to help with building forms. It will make things a little bit easier in terms of moving them around from page to page. But this will just give you an opportunity to move a lot of information as one unit. So what we can do is let's go ahead and let's duplicate these just as we had them before. And except this time, we're going to place each one of these sections into that group. Now, when you're moving around a section of information, you always want to use that middle dot of those three as your pointer or your cursor for your mouse. That's going to be that breakpoint. We can see right as that middle dot crosses over that line, it will register. So you'll want to use that middle dot as your pointer when you're moving sections of information around like so, and then we can just drop it in there. All right, and now if we choose to move this one, we can move all of those elements as one. So we can move this entire section, and even if we had, say a paragraph widget or something as well, in between, maybe maybe there's another section up here. We can also move this again as one unit to its desired position with all of that inside, or we can even use the arrows, the up or down arrows, to move it if we just want to move it up or down one space. So you can use the group tool to move things around like that. One other useful function that it's going to have, and also why we added that second scratch tab, is you'll be able to move sections of information as one in between tabs as well. So what we can do is we can open that up, scroll down to the option area, and then we can use the move function. The move function will allow us to move it in between tabs, and all we'll need to do is select that dropdown and select which tab we would like to send it to. Once you've selected that tab, we can click the move button, and it will move that over to the bottom of that new tab, or of that other tab. So if you are moving some information around, if you are moving some information around and you're going to be moving a lot of it, I always recommend just putting them into group tools, just because you can then move them all as one unit. You can also kind of separate out things in sections, if you will. Like, I would leave this all as one within that group tool. It won't affect the way the patient sees the form or interacts with the form at all. They won't be able to really get any use out of the group tool. It will just be a formatting tool for you on that builder side. But we can go back to the builder, and it will just make things a little bit easier for you in terms of moving things around. This will also attempt on a printout to keep this group of information together. This will be the only other way that I guess it would affect the form. But if, say, for instance, we had a title, a section title or something like that, that said siblings, and then this was going to be split between pages on the printout, it would just try to keep all of this information on the same page if possible. Other than that, again, your patient won't be able to see this group tool or use it really, so you can use this to move things around. However, I also find it's incredibly useful. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of this information. We don't need it anymore. I find it to be incredibly useful as well as a spacer for information within a column. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by that, we'll go ahead and add one more field in here just to demonstrate. And we'll go back down to 3 per row. Now, one thing to note about the column widget is that whenever whenever it is set to a set amount of elements, so we have it currently set to those 3 per row, then whenever there are not that many elements, or if it falls short of that number, for instance, in the final row of this column widget here, we only have 2 elements of information, so they are formatting as if this was set to 2 wide, right? So, and then similarly, if we were to do 2, then this one would take up this whole space. So if, maybe this was the name instead, you could see it's taking up that whole area. So one thing that we can do is use that group tool to go ahead and take up that extra space. So we'll go back to 3, and we're going to simulate this area being taken up by putting a widget in there that won't really be able to be seen. So now that group tool is taking up that 6th space in this widget, or in this column, excuse me. And then if we go to the next style, we can see that these remaining 2 elements will be formatted with the rest of the column, so everything will look nice and neat. And then we'll just have a blank space here as that group is taking up that extra space in the column. So I will say that I find the group tool to be most commonly used in this manner. You'll probably find more uses of it as a spacer. However, again, if you're moving things around, I always recommend to just place them into groups. It can also be easier to put each section, as I mentioned before, maybe the patient information, into a group. emergency contact information into a group, so on and so forth, just to kind of keep everything together on those printouts if possible. And then also, if you do need to move things around, you can just move that entire section as one unit rather than going in and moving each individual element. All right. I'm going to go. I know we are running a little bit short on time. I'm going to go ahead and open up that chat now, just in case we do have any questions or I need to go back over any of this. Columns and groups can sometimes prompt some questions. All right, well, let's go ahead and go back to, not the add page, the build. And just to talk briefly about your other options in the formatting section of the sidebar here, we talked a little bit about our repeating section widget. You'll also have the title and the paragraph, which I briefly mentioned. These will just be used for, title can be used for a section header or a page header. You can adjust the alignment or even the size of it as well if you want something to be smaller or larger. And then we have our paragraph widget. This will just be a open text widget. You can come in here and update this as needed. Formatting wise, you can break things down into lists, update, bold, italicize, whatever you may need to do. And then we also have our page break widget. Now the page break widget will act as a literal page break. So if we open this up, we will see a few options that are already toggled on for us here in the toggle menu. Your first up being the show line. If we toggle this off, that line will disappear and it will just act as a page break at this point. So the patient won't be able to see that line. However, because the use as page break toggle is still enabled, anything following this widget will be pushed to a new page anytime it's printed out. So this is a literal page break. If you just want to use this as a spacer in the form or a section divider or something like that, I always recommend disabling that use as page break toggle just so that everything isn't pushed out onto multiple pages when you're printing out submissions. But the page break can also be used as a spacer. I always recommend the group just because it's one less step and it's a little bit easier in terms of using that to its full effect. But again, we can use that group tool. We can put it at the very end of this section to take up that extra space. You can also do the same thing with the page break widget. Now again, the page break widget, you'll just need to remember to go in and turn off that page break and that line, and now it will just take up that extra space, much like the group tool. But the reason that I recommend the group tool is because you won't need to remember to go in and turn off that functionality. You can just set it and forget it. And then finally, we have the table and the pop-up paragraphs. The table will be similar to the repeating section. However, it will only allow for text fields and drop downs to be placed within. Once you place a few fields within, you'll be able to set those column headers. So we could have, maybe these are medications or something. We could do name, and then we could do dose. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and add a placeholder information. You'll notice that we'll only be able to see that placeholder and not the column headers. In this view, we will be able to see that once we go into the style page, but then we can go in here and update this much like we would the repeating section widget. So maybe this is medications, and then we can also change that item label to medication. So it says add medication. Next is style. And now whenever we add another medication, instead of adding each widget with its own title, it's just going to add another row of cells. And I just have two different styles here, one with that placeholder information and one without. So depending on how you want that information to display, that will kind of be up to you. But this is much like the repeating section, will allow the patient to add an infinite number, as many as they need. But again, it will only accept the text field widget and the drop-down widget. If you need to set a section like that up, but you need to use any of the other widgets, then I would recommend using a repeating section in that situation instead. And then finally, if you have any large text, you can enter that into our pop-up paragraph. We can just do a little example here. We can go to our style. This will allow you to have a very long bit of information and then allow the patient to open that up to view it. You can also have this set to be hidden on print. So anytime that you print those forms out, the pop-up paragraph information will not be included. However, it will be there on the live version for your patient to be able to be viewed. All right. And then once we have the form built out to wherever we need, we can just go ahead back to that style page. This will give us one last opportunity to update any of the styling for this form, whether that be the logo file or the background color or any of the selection option colors or anything like that. You can change all of that information with this left sidebar over here. For instance, the background color. If you do know that hex key that you use for the styling, you can enter that here, or you could just use the color picker to slide around and find something that looks good with the logo that's uploaded. And if you don't have a logo uploaded, this will just default to your account name instead. Once this is all set and ready, we'll click next to publish. That will take us to step 4. It says publish, but we have one more step to go before this form is live. This is just going to give us one last opportunity to update our packet title or collect any of this other information from this packet that we may need. Once we're ready, we can save that packet name to ensure that if we changed it, that those updates have been made. And then we can click My Account or Finish Building, go to My Account. Either one's going to take us back to the Send and Receive page. Once back here, we'll know that those changes have been saved and published. We can now go back down to our My Forms page, and we can go ahead and click on that public link of the form, and we can see all of the changes that we've made, all of the forms that we've built. Everything is nice and formatted, and our group tool is in use, as well as our page break tool, both being used as spacers, and our columns are making things look a little bit nicer for us. All right, that will conclude the webinar on formatting tools. It does not look like we have any questions today. So just as another reminder, we do host these form building webinars every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. Tuesdays will be the beginner, Thursdays the advanced, and that's not to say that the beginner is a prerequisite to join the advanced. We just get into a little more complicated or in-depth situations in the advanced webinar, but we do encourage any and all to join as often as they like. These are all free. We also host onboarding webinars every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. In those webinars will take you through how to use the account, update admin information, user information, send forms, all of that good stuff. Those will be held at Monday, Wednesday, Fridays at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. But again, if you do have any staff members or coworkers that you would like to learn this information as well, please feel free to send them our way, as we do encourage everyone to join as often as they like. If you would like to keep up with our form building schedule for the month of March, you can get there by going to My Account, Support, and Search Guide. This will take you to our product guide, which can answer many questions that you may have in terms of just using the account, building forms, setting up integrations, whatever the case may be. For instance, building forms, we can come in and learn how to duplicate and move columns, which we talked about today. We'll have some imagery and some step-by-step instructions on how to get all of that done for you. And if you go back to the home page of our product guide, at the bottom right in the FormDr Updates section, we will have our webinar schedules posted, so you can kind of see what we will be going over on any specific date for the month of March in our form building webinars. The onboarding webinars won't change much in terms of the information that we'll be going over. However, the form building webinars we will, so you can always come here to keep track of that schedule and see if there's something that you would like to be in attendance for. And if you're not able to be in attendance that day for whatever reason, don't worry, we will be posting these videos after the fact. If we go down to our February schedule, for instance, we will have them say posted, click here. You can then click on that. It will take you right to that YouTube video, and we'll have some timestamps over for the information that we'll be going over at the bottom as well. But all right. Thank you so much, everybody. That will conclude it for us today. Hope you all have a great afternoon and hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.